How's it going, Raiders? My name is Ryan, and this is TRC episode 36. On today's episode, we will be looking at the tanking perspective in the Uldir raid. Without further ado, tanks, everyone's ready. Pull timer on you.
The heroes have made it to the glorious finale.
All right, here we go, guys. Sit up in your chairs, focus up. Let's do this.
Alright guys, get buffed up.
Okay, so we want to soak the annihilations,
Get your shit together.
then we want to target the annihilator,
Put big girl panties on.
move back to avoid damage from eradication,
I think I've disconnected.
then we target decimator,
Can we pull already?
then we target boss.
I hope you can swim in molten lava.
Let's kill this dragon.
Welcome back, Raiders. As I've already stated, my name is Ryan, and you are listening to the Raiders Confessional podcast, where we talk all things in-game wise in the world of Azeroth. Today, joining me as always from the land of Denmark is one Martin Larson, and from the land of Canada, one Oreo. How's it going, guys?
Hello. Pretty good.
That's going pretty good.
So I gonna have to apologize, starting at 30 minutes late. We got our times mixed up, but we are here ready to roll, pun intended, as we will be talking tanking in the land of Uldir, as I currently play the tanking role in this trio as a Brewmaster Monk. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to hear from around the world what everybody's been up to. Marty, I guess we'll start with you, buddy.
I have been a filthy casual for a few weeks and just enjoying not having to sim every time I get a new random item. So things are good.
Yeah.
Got my horde character up to max level and just playing through the story and yeah, just enjoying life. I actually did jump into a normal raid as well with randoms and just to see how that works. And I mean, we got up 2 and killed Soul, so it was a pretty good run, good fun.
You think you'll join a less hardcore guild at some point, or you think you'll just stay kind of LFG wise for a while?
I'm not too sure yet. I think that's the whole idea behind me going rogue. That don't really know. We'll see what happens. I don't feel like having fixed days, so responsibility to keep up with the raiding group at the moment. So I just want to explore the story and see what happens, and don't have to worry about Azeroth gear.
Sure. Well, we certainly welcome the casual perspective from your end, as Oreo and I are continuing the Mythic grind. So it might be nice to get a little bit of more of a laid-back perspective on things, and we might forget some of the mechanics that are different in the lower difficulty, so we'll keep you here to remind us.
Yeah.
Oreo, buddy, what have you been up to?
Not much. As far as rating is concerned, we've kind of gotten ourselves to the point where heroic is easily clearable. Yeah, we're able to clear heroic fairly easy and quick, and we're moving on to mythic now. Able to get to mythic bosses in our first night of raiding, which is kind of a big step forward. We're kind of getting to the point where we're only going to be doing mythic, so that's exciting.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely we're kind of like you said. We're at that point where we full cleared all of heroic and the first 2 bosses in mythic in a single raid night, which left the second raid night for our raid week completely wide open to bang our heads against the wall of one particular boss, which was fun. You know, considering we haven't done that yet this expansion with this group. So
What boss are you up to? Just out of curiosity.
we went Zekvos.
Mythic.
Yeah, we went Zekvos after Mother and Talix. So I think which is what most groups end up doing. Fetid can be quite the DPS wall. And I think Vectis is a little bit more mechanically challenging from what I understand. And so Zekvos tends to be the first one you go to. But we have a lot of people in our group that, like I said before, have taken breaks or coming back to the game, haven't played with this group before. So it was, most of the mechanics you can burn past, and a lot of the heroic and normal stuff in Mother and Talic are relatively easy. So it was a little bit eye-opening, I think, for the most of the group that we have some work to do as a group, and we definitely need to step up our game. But overall, I think, you know, when you look at the entirety of last week, we had a really good week as a fresh guild and the beginning of an expansion. So hopes are high moving forward, and we'll make the adjustments we need to, and hopefully we'll get into this next week and get Zach Voss down and move on to the next frustrating wall. So,
but I mean, it seems like you're at the same place that my old guild is as well, because they have killed the two first bosses on Mythic. They're clearing heroic, doing the first night, and then going to Mythic. I think they're about to switch to Mythic only. So it feels like you're on point with an already established guild as well.
Yeah, and I think like a buddy of mine, he was in one of the top guilds on our old server. You know, he obviously wasn't Midwinter. Midwinter held the top title on that old server, but you know, they were getting cutting edge. You know, almost every single tier, and they were doing it with, you know, at least a couple of months to go before the next tier would drop. So they're I think right now they're a 4 of 8. So the fact that we're 2 of 8, and you know, I think we'll be okay. We just need, you know, people to kind of step up and start getting that. I think one of the problems is, and we were talking about this the other night, is there's definitely a different mentality when it comes to heroic and normal versus mythic. And I think to me that sums up in one little phrase: it's proactive versus reactive thinking. Whereas in normal heroic, a lot of times, whether it's the amount of time given to react to certain things, or the fact that they won't one-shot you, you can afford to be a little bit more reactive and make some mistakes, and it's okay as long as the majority of your guild are doing things somewhat cleanly. But then once you get to the mythic thing, where you absolutely need every single person alive for the majority of the fight, one person dying because they were not proactive enough paying attention to their timers, or making sure they're not dotting or breaking CC on ads that are meant to be CC'd, or clipping the edge of a mechanic when they were trying to max min their movement. It's a night and day difference, in my opinion, in terms of the mentality. And I think that is where our group is at, is we just need to reach that next mental level of being proactive in terms of paying attention to timers, making sure we are absolutely out of mechanics. If there's a point where the strat calls for everyone to stack, everyone is stacking. There's not 2 or 3 people who are standing 5-6 yards out from the group. Just doing mechanics as a group collectively more cleanly. But overall, again, I think our group is doing well for a fresh group, and I do have high hopes that we will get past this and move forward and continue to knock some bosses down, and hopefully get cutting edge before 8.1 drops. So for those of the guild that are listening, you know, positive thoughts, we'll get this. But yeah, so I guess for me and Oreo, what we've been up to is relatively the same. The only difference for me is obviously been doing the podcasting with the other respective projects I'm attached to with Marty here, and I've also been taking some time to start leveling a Blood DK in the event that 8.1 drops, and we might want to move away from having 2 Brewmaster monks, but you know, we'll see. So my aim is to go ahead.
But you're still going to look straight into the crotch of the boss. That doesn't change.
Yeah, I'm good right there. You know, the other side of the boss is a little bit more stinky, so at least this side, you know,
fair enough.
You don't have that end of it. But my aim eventually is to have all tanks, but Prot Warrior and Guardian Druid level. And I think if Guardian Druid does end up being strong, I won't have an issue leveling that. But I just hope at some point Prot Warriors are not just so far above and beyond better than every other tank that I actually have to level one, because I have no desire to play one whatsoever. But yeah, so that's what we've been up to. What do you guys say we quit dilly down and just jump right in this and get after this pretty quickly here? Marty's shaking his head. Oreo's kind of hiding in the
I was nodding.
Yeah, shaking your head in agreement. There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, and Oreo's, man, it's so funny. You're sitting in the camera, you're like hiding in the shadows. You're just kind of a silhouette there.
Is he a rogue?
Well, I mean, I guess he could go. Yeah, he could go a cat and go stealth.
Yeah, go feral.
So
no.
before we real quick jump into the tanking portion of this episode, I know our typical format for those of you listening or watching has been to bring on a guest to kind of be the episode's quasi expert. However, this week our tanking guest kind of fell through. They weren't able to be here, and instead of making you guys wait another week, considering we just recently took 2 weeks off, I figured with Marty, Oreo, and I all playing a DPS, a healer, and a tank, we should just go ahead and move forward and just get you guys out an episode rather than make you guys wait again. So hopefully starting next week when we jump into our next episode, we will have a guest on the show. But I do apologize for not having one on this week, but it is what it is. So we will jump right into things. So starting things off, as I am the tank on the episode, you guys are probably going to hear me talk most of the time, with these other two knuckleheads jumping in as they see fit.
This is where I go play another game.
So yeah, we will talk some Talic here. And again, typical format, I will talk to the highest level of difficulty that I have personally done, as our typical format would have so. And I will also interject any knowledge I possess of the difficulties I have yet to do. But I will talk firstly and foremostly from the difficulty I have done so far. So after Zekphos, I'll probably jump down to speaking to Heroic first. And then we'll just kind of go from there. So starting off with Talic, it's a really, really easy fight. One of the things that I kind of laugh at, just not necessarily to laugh that it's stupid or make fun of the strat, but I do think it's funny that these strats exist when they aren't necessary. Some of the strats for Talic do actually call for tank swapping. In the lower difficulties, that swap exists to mainly control the boss's movement. As one tank runs the cudgel out, the other tank stands where the previous tank was tanking and then taunts the boss back to get the boss to go to and from its location as quickly as possible. But with, our group with two Brewmaster monks, one can roll, the one tank tanking the boss can roll over there and then, meditate back or whatever, or just roll back. It's not a huge deal. We haven't, even on Mythic, we haven't needed for a tank swap because we just have people soak when the enlarged heart debuff goes out. Everybody else just stacks with the tank tanking the boss. So the way our group has done it, the other tank is tanking the boss the entire time. And then when we go into the elevator phase, that particular tank tanks the ads that take a little while to kill, and then I soak the bloods that do a knockback. And then when we get towards the end of the elevator, I usually taunt whatever ad is coming up or is already on the other tank and hold aggro on those. And that way when we get off the elevator, the DPS swaps to that, kills that ad. The other tank is ready to pick up the boss again. And then we go back through phase one where he tanks the boss the whole time. We all stack for the enlarged heart. And then I'm constantly running around just soaking the ads so our DPS can, tunnel the boss, so to speak, while dodging mechanics. And that's worked relatively well for us on all difficulties. Again, it's the first boss. It's really easy. Most heroic guilds, if they can field 20 people, I feel should be able to breeze past this boss. So other than that, I don't think there's really much to the tanking side of things. Oreo, I don't know if your experience with tanks and their health pools has been any sort of noteworthy for healers from the tanking side of things. I don't know.
I find that the tanks are actually the ones that take the least amount of damage during that entire encounter.
Is that primarily because we're both monks, you think?
I don't think it's quite that, but I just think that there's so much predictable outgoing burst damage on the raid as opposed to the tank that you're going to find that the tank will hardly probably even dip below, I'd say, like 50% ever in the fight. But you're going to see the DPS going up and down as mechanics come out, like Enlarged Heart, having Cudgel go out and not being far enough away, things like that.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead, Marty.
I guess with the puddles that the tanks need to soak, well, the boss you need to get the boss to charge to the puddles to soak them, right? Is that where you're taunting, or how do you do that?
That's where, if you were utilizing the taunt strat, that's where on the lower difficulties, that's where you would use the taunt swap, so that the boss gets back to its original location quicker, instead of if for whatever reason the tank who drops the boss over there doesn't have a movement ability back. He's running back, and so the boss will be following him the whole way there. So it just allows for that boss to move quicker to and from.
Yeah, because I think there is a demon hunters who can jump out. Yeah, I guess warriors can jump out as well. So yeah, I guess that those movement abilities helps a lot.
Even when our other tank who's brewmaster now as well, he originally was on a prop paladin, and he was running the double charge on his movement ability, and even then he wasn't. I don't think we ever had an issue with him getting back to his location quickly. So, I think if you were to absolutely do the strat, try and do it as cleanly and efficiently as possible, you would use some taunt swapping, but it's just not necessary.
Or if you're Death Knight, I guess.
Yeah, they would be the only ones I would think that would have some issue, just because I don't know if their movement ability would be up again in time, even if they're running.
Yeah, they should.
Yeah,
I think it's only on a 1 minute cooldown, so you should be able to use it every time.
Okay.
But that would really only be one direction, right? It would either to get there or to get back, but not the other.
Yeah, but we're also looking at what's your raid comp, or do you have more range, or do you have more melee, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that was the one last note I wanted to make from a tanking side of things. If you are running a heavy melee comp like we are, melee, for the love of Christ, please pay attention if you have the debuff when the enlarged heart thing goes out, that you are not trying to stack with the rest of the group on the tank. Our melee, a lot of times, they have to spread out, and they're trying to stay on the boss while spreading out. So we've had a few times where two players are almost encroaching the edge of their circle onto where people are stacking. So it's just one of those things, like, just be aware of where you're standing, make sure you're spreading out and not being somewhere you're not supposed to be. We've had a few times where we've had some unnecessary early wipes because somebody was standing in the group or on the, clipping the group with their debuff circle. I forget the name of that spell, but you guys will see it once you get to Mythic. I'm being told there's a window okay, sorry. I know what he's talking about. But yeah, so that's Talik. We will move on here to Mother. For those of you tanks that have no mobility, comparatively speaking, and get the job of tanking the boss, I feel very, very sorry for you. This boss, even as a monk, man, it gives me anxiety when I'm not someone that typically has anxiety. The lower difficulties, normal, in LFR, I assume you can just press your forward key and never get pushed around by the winds. But on Heroic and Mythic especially, you cannot hold your place or move against the winds. They are strong enough that you get pushed back. The only way I'm able to stay in place is if I use my roll, or my chi torpedo rather, and then I have the mobility afterwards, the increased movement speed, and that movement speed allows me to hold my place. So I've actually had to relearn how I do the boss from Heroic to Mythic, to where I actually let the winds push me, and then right before she does her strike, where nobody should be in front, I believe it's sanitizing strike, I roll her to where she needs to be, pointing her away from the group, and then do that. But from a tanky side of things, whether you're on normal, Heroic or Mythic, as a tank, don't be, basically point her away from the group at all times. When she does her sanitizing strike, you step to the side before the cast goes off. And I would advise you, now obviously this is up to you and your group how you want to do it. I typically will stay off to the side, because she immediately casts flames right afterwards, and then once those flames go out, I step back in front of her to where I was previously. That way I'm not moving her all over the place when people are trying to drop their flames and stuff like that, and it just makes it easier for people to kind of find open space during all those mechanics. It can be one noteworthy thing to keep in mind, whether you're a monk, a demon hunter, or warrior. It doesn't matter what tanking class you are. If you are tanking the boss, just become aware relatively quickly how much space you do need against the winds on the higher difficulties to get her to turn around. I've had a few times where I was far enough away, so I chi torpedoed and I ended up right underneath her, and she just stayed facing towards the entire group. So I kind of have to pay attention to how far away I am and where the timers are at. And sometimes I have to torpedo sooner than later. And then also when you do jump in front of her to point that thing away. Keep in mind, you need to turn and face her relatively quickly. Otherwise, she's going to punch you in the back. I've had that happen a few times and dipped really low and watched my stagger go up to like 200%. That was fun. But yeah, so then in the subsequent, that's in the first chamber. And then in the second and third chamber, obviously, you need to be paying attention to when the sanitizing strike is going off, so you're facing her away. You need to try and be positioning her at all times so that you're not screwing over the rest of the raid group. And then also be aware of the beams that not only come down from the ceiling, but also come across the room. In the Mythic difficulty, it does both of those mechanics one after the other. It'll typically do the one that travels across the room, and then directly following that, or immediately following after that, the ones coming out of the ceiling will come down. And there's usually some mechanic that's either happening during all that or directly after that. So that was a bit of an adjustment for me going into Mythic, that I had to make sure that I was standing in a place or getting her positioned in a place super quick during or after, immediately after those mechanics, so that I wasn't having her sanitizing strike on the raid group. Our group does a strat where we trickle over slowly from chamber 1 to 2, and then in chamber 3, or going into chamber 3, we hang out in chamber 2 for a little while. We usually let 2 winds go off, which allows us to kind of get the boss low enough and, you know, just kind of get situated. And then immediately following after that second wind, we all stack directly on the chamber 2 side of the barrier into chamber 3. And I point her away because she's usually doing a sanitizing strike at that time group. And then we have half of the raid groups, so group 1 and 2, go over with a bunch of healing CDs popped. And the absolute second the raid is topped off and stable, groups 3 and 4 go over, and we again get everybody topped off. Blow lust, blow up the ads, blow up the boss, and then all of the mechanics in chamber 3 from chamber 2 still exist, with the flames, the sanitizing strike, the beams out of the ceiling and across the room, and sanitizing strike. So it's a lot to pay attention to, especially if you're the tank tanking the boss. Just trying to keep her positioned and pointed away the whole time. So yeah, that was fun. I have yet to be the tank that tanks the ads, but if you are the tank that tanks the ads, make sure you're just doing your best job at keeping aggro on those ads and getting aggro on those ads as quickly as possible. We've had some troubles with we have 2 demon hunters and they do nutty AoE, and so sometimes it's hard to pull aggro off them really quick if your taunts are down and stuff like that. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. But other than that, that's all I have to say on tanking. I don't know if you two have anything to interject here before we move on.
I would say the best tank for this fight, hands down, is a Blood DK.
For the ads, right?
For anything, if you're tanking the boss, basically, like, the biggest issue has always been the wins for the tanks. Like, you're trying to get them faced properly, at least for our group. And I've noticed that at least with the Blood DK, you can pop your Death's Advance, and it nullifies that completely. Like, you don't even get knocked back whatsoever. And that's huge because you can just stand there with the boss exactly where you want it.
Do they not? They don't have to press their movement key. They just stand
there. Yeah, it just negates any. Basically, it's like any knockbacks or anything like that. So you can just stand there and take it.
Yeah, I did not know that. So that's really nice to know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm leveling a DK at the moment. Actually.
Well, there you go. If you have blood DKs, they're the best at tanking the ads as well as the boss for Mother.
Yeah, it's great for keeping all the ads together where you need them, and it's also great for if you're actually tanking the boss and you're trying to get those strikes faced outside.
Fair enough. Yeah, well, we will move on then. We will move on to the last boss I have done on Mythic, which is Zekphos. Let me pull him up here. Where'd you go? There you go. So again, on Mythic, all of the same components exist that are on normal and heroic. From the tanking side of things, you do have the Void Lashes, as well as the Shatter. Some groups will utilize a strat where one tank takes this first Void Lash, then takes the Shatter, and then the second tank will taunt the last Void Lash, and then just keep the boss until the next round happens. just because there's not a third Void Lash to hit them again, and usually their Void Lash debuff will drop off by the time the next cycle starts. Our group doesn't do that. It's not necessary. I've done some investigating into this, and a lot of groups just ignore that strat, and they do the strat where one tank tanks both Void Lashes and the Shatter, and then they taunt swap. From a tanky side of things, I can only speak to the Brewmaster. If you're going to use your Purifying Brew, you typically want to use it immediately following the Shatter, and potentially again in the second Void Lash, just to help your healers get you topped off. Primarily because that boss, that second Void Lash, if you don't have cooldowns popped or popped on you, you are going to be dipping low and you don't get any heals. I've had a few times where my Rushing Jade Wind, the ads have spawned at the same time, and my Rushing Jade Wind is pulled aggroed on the big ad, and he's turned around and meleeed me and just killed me. And so that's been one of our struggles when we've been learning this fight, is healers and tanks working together just to make sure the tanks are being continually topped off during that cycle of Void Lashes and Shatter. It is a ton of damage. And you do get that no healing received debuff when you have that second Void Lash where you don't take any healing at all. So just be aware of that. And obviously, depending on what tanks you guys are running, adjust accordingly. And then another difference from a tanky side of things is the period of time where you're having to move when the circles are going out, and you have to find the center, the middle, or the outer ring that is open. It does 6 cycles of it in Mythic. So you are constantly having to move for that. And then as you go further into the fight, that happens while other mechanics are going off, whether it be the ad spawning and stuff like that. So just, again, if you're the tank with the aggro at any given time, make sure you are aware of that. The boss doesn't hit very hard outside of the Void Lashes and the Shatters. So you should be okay. Just if you have active mitigation, make sure you are, if you're dipping low, you're keeping it up. Monks, we have the ability to keep ours up 100% of the time, so just make sure you're keeping it up, and then obviously purify when needed during the Void Lashes and the Shatters. Other than that, tanks, make sure when you are killing the big ads, as you're cycling through them, the off tank typically wants to grab aggro if they can, but as long as one of the tanks has aggro, you can manage. You typically don't want a non-tank player to have aggro on those, because their void bolts, when not interrupted, hurt. And so it's much more manageable for healers if that damage is going out on a tank versus a non-raid player. So other than that, I don't have a lot to say on tanking for this boss. I don't know if you guys have anything to throw in here.
I would say that, yet again, Blood DK is one of the better tanks, just due to the fact that they can AMS the healing absorption, or at least one of the healing absorption strikes. They can AMS it, and that's huge. Like, I don't know of another tank that can do that. I guess Pallies can with spell warding, but I just think that it's interesting that most of these fights have been designed that the Blood DKs can cheese it.
Which usually always is the case, right?
Yeah.
For whatever dumb reason.
Even
even on the primarily physical damage bosses, Blood DK's healing ability in the past has always made them one of the better tanks for it. It's just kind of dumb how that works out, that they're really strong in both magical and physical encounters. Mm-hmm. They're also really, really good for the grips on the ads. That's really nice, even though you can't technically aggro and tank the little ads. The fact that you can bring them all together allows your group to damage them down quicker. And then if you utilize some other components with stuns and a ring of peace, you can really control those ads, all because of a Blood DK. Vengeance Demon Hunters can do it too. They're not as strong at it just because of the radius of their grip is not as wide. But if your group is smart and clean and efficient at some of that stuff, you can absolutely take advantage of those and really excel in those moments with purely from the little ads with a Blood DK or a Vengeance Demon Hunter. So that's really all I have to say. Obviously, all of the same mechanics exist on all difficulties. They either happen more frequently or they start to overlap as you increase in difficulty. So Yeah. We shall move on from here. Let's talk some Vectis. Where is he? There he is. So on this fight, it's again, there's a tank swap mechanic. If you are the tank swapping in, if you have DBM, it's really easy. DBM, I'm assuming Bigwigs does the same, where it tells you when to swap off. But in the event you don't, there will be a spell, I believe it is called Lingering Infection, where the debuff will be on the tank, which basically makes him take more damage. You just swap at that point to, in order to avoid one of the tanks falling over. So you just taunt swap back and forth the whole time.
It's just one stack, or
Honestly, I believe it is.
okay.
I usually pay attention to when the cast is going off and when DBM is yelling at me. To usually swap right away. If you're not tanking, there's been a few times where I've gone and helped with other things, but the main focus from tanks for this fight is just making sure you're swapping at the right moment, and then during the intermission phase, when the boss does this little swirly thing on the ground and then travels to one section of the room, and then he starts shooting the little waves out. He also puts circles on the ground that you need to soak. So usually myself and the other tank, I notice we usually trying to find the ones where circles are overlapping, and one of us will move over there and double soak, just because we have really nothing else to do at that point in time. So it's just, easier for us to soak things. But yeah, the biggest focus, in my opinion, on this fight as a tank is just making sure you're taunt swapping at the right time. So, do you guys have anything to add here from a tanking perspective?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but
Death
again,
Knight is the best one for this.
Blood Death Knight, because you can actually AMS that the taunt swap mechanic and negate it for that duration.
Which is so funny, because if you look at all of the rankings that talk about what classes are best suited right now, from a progressional standpoint, Brewmasters are the top, but then you go through every single fight and you're like, but Blood DKs can do this better. It's like, well, how does that work out? But
it's just the raw damage that the Brewmaster can take and spread out. Whereas
go ahead.
I was gonna say, whereas if you get a massive strike on a Blood DK that doesn't have anything for it, they're pretty much toast.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing. I was actually talking about this with somebody the other day. I think when you are looking at progression, when guilds are arguably going up against content where they are under geared, Brewmasters are the best. But as guilds tend to start getting more gear, and they are out gearing the encounters as they're going through progression, they cease to be one of the best tanks, just because some of the other tanks can cheese some of the mechanics. But when you can't cheese mechanics and you just have to deal with the damage, Brewmasters are the best. A lot of the times, just like Oreo said, because of the fact that we can stagger huge chunks of damage, so that we don't, like if there's 120,000 damage, ability, most of the tanks are going to take 120,000 damage, whereas the monk's going to take 30, 40,000, and the rest of that's going to be put onto stagger that, healers can manage much more easily, or the tank can purify. So, but yeah, so make sure you're taunt swapping in the right time, and then helping with soaks and avoiding the waves that go out on Vectis. On Mythic, it also says here that there's 12 new ads that need to be tanked and killed. So if it's anything like the other difficulties, if you're the off tank, usually that's going to be your job, is grabbing aggro on those, and making sure that they are kind of stacked on the boss so that everything can be cleaved. But yeah, so that's Vectis. Let's talk Fetid. Fetid is on the lower difficulties. Once you get the strat down, it's not a big deal. On Mythic, that tends to be the wall. This one, I'm going to argue with Oreo here. Blood DKs are not the best for this boss. If you're a Brewmaster, your job is, you're not tanking the boss. You are soaking the thrashes. This boss has an ability where every fourth strike, the boss will target the off tank and do a really, really big damaging hit. and the boss does these strikes relatively quickly. So it's every 3 to 4 seconds that off tank is going to be taking a huge chunk of damage. So like I said earlier, our tank used to be, we actually started the expansion with a Guardian Druid who quit the game. And then one of our raid leaders stepped in on his prop pally. And so he and I have been tanking. And both of those tanks, they just take huge amounts of damage. Our Guardian Druid early on was literally falling over, even with the giant health pool. And so I have been the one taking the thrashes. What's really nice is I have the 4 stacks of my bruise talent. And so I can typically stay at all 4 stacks, usually for 3 to 4 thrashes. And then going into that 4th, 5th thrash, I might need to start purifying some damage. But what is really nice is usually about the time I might be questioning whether or not I'm going to have enough brew stacks to continue to handle these, the boss will do either start doing his cone or charge across the room, that kind of stuff, where he no longer is doing the thrash ability, that I can recharge my brews. So if you are the monk tank, don't worry about purifying some damage after 4 to 5 stacks. I struggled very early on with freaking out and purifying when my stagger was in the red, and that was usually, I wasn't freaking out about 80%, but around the 150, 160% stagger, I was starting to freak out. But once I got more comfortable with both my healers and the class itself, I started to realize that I could get 180, 90, 200% stagger sometimes, and it'd be fine. But I typically do, as long as I know I can manage it, I will purify 180 beyond, just because it's easier on the healers. And there's not a threat of me falling over relatively quickly. So if you don't have a brewmaster in your group and you find that tanks are having to use some cooldowns to keep up with those thrashes, you guys might need to start utilizing a taunt swap rotation, where every 2 or 3 thrashes your tanks will swap using. That way they can roll through their cooldowns, and then also healers can throw some externals on the tanks too, just to deal with that mechanic. But if you're doing the strat how most groups do it, where they just kind of primarily focus the boss and tunnel through a lot of the mechanics, maybe your group kills one egg, the boss will drop soon enough that you shouldn't have a point where you're running out of cooldowns between the healers and the tanks. But tanks, last big note here, make sure the 2 of you are always right next to each other. In melee, do not be hugging the boss, try and be max range. Because if at any point in time the tanks maybe scooted a little bit too far left or right, and during the knockback got knocked halfway across the room, that boss, obviously, when he does his thrash, is going to target the next person closest in range to himself when he does that 4th thrash. And if you're toast. So tanks, make sure you guys are paying attention to where your backs are at all times. Usually try and tank them up against a wall, and always stay next to each other. That way the boss doesn't target somebody else. I believe that mechanic finds the person who is closest to the tank with the aggro, correct?
Yep.
So just be aware of that. Anything other than that, I don't know if there's much else to say, unless you two have anything to interject here.
Nothing that has to do with tanking, but I just remember that fight being so annoying because of the knockback, and because you're ending in walls and inside other stuff on the playing field, just falling through the floor or whatever. It had so many bugs in the beginning. I hope they have fixed most of those by now.
All I know is a few of the bosses have bugs where it'll DC a player and then you can never log back in if you're still in the instance. So you have to kick them from raid, and that's always fun. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, this is one that your tanks are gonna love your Holy Paladin, just with how much tank damage is going out. I guess that's kind of opposed to what you kind of see at the first 2 bosses. You definitely see, especially in the Zekphos and this one, you're gonna be, if you don't have a Holy Paladin, you're gonna definitely notice these tanks are gonna be taking a lot of chunking damage that might not get healed up in time.
I've gone through our logs a few times, Oreo, and I've noticed that the number 1 damaging ability for the entire raid is stagger. Because
and that will always be,
because of how hard that thrash hits. So I agree. Blood DKs are not best for this.
Yeah, I mean, the other things to keep an eye on as well is your positioning is key on the fight. Um, Blizzard did nerf the Mythic version of this, where uh, in Heroic and Normal, there's only 2 of these blobs that spawn that you have to kill, but in Mythic, there's a third one that is faster than the other 2 that you have to focus down. Obviously, your largest DPS will focus those down as quickly as possible. So to have yourself positioned so that those players can swap very quickly is pretty key to success.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading right here too. So I think that's a good point to make. We will move on here. So that is the first 5 bosses. This is we're going to move on to Zool now. This fight is kind of a snooze fest. First phase as a tank, especially if you're the tank on Zool. That usually job falls on me. You just stand there. You literally just stand there.
Wait. Isn't phase 1, you need to go through all that trash?
Yep.
I don't want to talk about that trash. That trash gives me nightmares.
And
Oh
that
my
is the
God.
nightmare trash.
It just
Yeah.
keeps going on and on and on.
That's the real boss, is all the trash
Yeah.
on Zool's platform.
If you can clear the trash, then you're over halfway through the encounter.
You arguably have 2 roles for the tanks on phase 1. And this is strictly speaking from a normal and heroic standpoint. One tank will be on Zool the whole time. Their job usually is to tank I believe they're called Krogs, the little tiny minions that spawn, as well as any of the, what are they, rune casters or whatever, mistcaster, or what are they called? You remember what they're called, Oreo?
Is it Blood Weavers or whatever?
Yeah,
Something like that.
whatever
Something
the
to do with blood.
yeah, whatever the caster ad that spawns. There's usually 2 of them that spawn. Our group will CC. We've utilized 2 strats now where I think we're high enough DPS now on the lower difficulties that we just CC them the whole time. We usually don't get a second set. But in the earlier stages where we're getting multiple sets, we would CC one. Our DKs would grip the other one over. I would tank it on the boss so that it could be cleaved. And then obviously when the Krogs spawn out, I'd tank those as well on the boss, and those would be cleaved. The other tank is usually tanking the big ad. And when that big ad gets close to 100% energy, that tank drags him way out, because at 100 energy, he will do a maneuver where with a really big radius around him that it kind of reminds me of a shout, and it puts a buff on the boss where the boss does more damage. So you really want to drag him way out if you're not going to kill him before he reaches 100% energy, and then once he does his move, you bring him back in so he can be cleaved again. But for the most part, unless you just reach a point where you have to hard swap, all DPS should be primarily DPSing the boss and then cleaving off onto the ads. That's the strat I think we have found that works best for us. So like I said, phase 1 is relatively boring for the one tank on the boss. I usually drop my statue, focus the boss, and then when the ads get close, I will taunt the statue and go back to the boss and just roll through my AoE rotation. Phase 2 is when it really gets interesting, depending on, well, it's interesting no matter what strat you choose to use for how you tank the boss. We tank the boss in the middle, and then the other tanks run out. Now, again, this is strictly speaking from a heroic and normal standpoint. We have yet to do Mythic, so there may be a situation where we may change the strat around. And then the tank who, once the boss gets swapped, the tank who has the debuff from the boss will run out and then drop their pools as far out as they can while their healers are still able to reach them. And you just roll through that, and obviously, as each tank runs out to drop his debuff, you try and drop it as, on top of the other ones to save space as much as possible. I will say when going out with the debuff, even at 376 item level, it hurts. So if you're a brewmaster, this is definitely a time where you can be doing some purifying, stuff like that. Call for externals if you need them, pop your own. I typically try not to pop my own cooldowns until we get later in the fight, because we've had a few times where we've killed the boss with like maybe 10 people up, and I've just had to, the fact that we killed it was due to myself or the other tank having some of their own personal cooldowns up to keep themselves alive long enough. But again, if you need to use it, you need to use it. Just be aware. Don't be afraid to call for externals. The tank who has the debuff on the dropping his debuff will absolutely take the most damage. That debuff hurts. So healers really pay attention to them. And don't outrange your healers, tanks. You know, if you need to outrange your healers to not drop the debuff on the raid, you know, say something. Make sure your healers know and they're getting over there to keep you healed. But you typically want to be swapping anywhere from 2 to 4 stacks. Anything more than that, you're probably behind, and it's gonna be tough to get past that unless you just completely outgear the fight collectively. But yeah, that's mainly the fight. The only thing I have to say beyond that is if you do go into phase 2 with some ads up, your DPS really wants to swap to those ads and hard target them down as quickly as possible. If if they're obviously on one of your tanks, because your tanks really do need to be able to swap. And then again, if you have the Crusher, you need to make sure he is far enough away from the boss so he doesn't debuff the boss, because this is the phase where the tanks will tank a ton of damage. But yeah, other than that, if all ads are down, just make sure you're swapping at 2 to 4 stacks and dropping your debuffs far enough away. You have anything else to add here, guys?
I'd say Mythic is interesting due to the fact that you're always going to have ads up at that last phase. It's basically a turn and burn. Anybody who's looking at logs or looking at kill videos and stuff, you're going to see a buttload of sub-rogues for that single target burst, and you're also probably going to see quite a few things like frost mages and whatnot. Because of the way that it works, you want to have everything clumped together for everybody to be able to swap. Because I think you only get a window of about 10 seconds to absolutely destroy something, and that way that it stays dead and doesn't get revived. So you got to be especially careful with your Crusher.
Oh, hooray. I'm super excited to do this fight now. Oh, man. I don't think I've ever had anxiety as much playing this game as I have tanking.
Oh, tanking's so easy. You should try healing.
Oh, man. But yeah, so moving on here, we will go into Mithrax. Again, this is another fight with a taunt swap mechanic. You have a boss phase, and then you have an intermission phase with ads. During the boss phase, you typically want to tank the boss away from the raid group, no matter where you tank him. Some groups will tank him up against a wall. We tank him in the middle just because we have enough melee that we need to give melee enough room to spread out. Tanks, don't be in front of each other. The boss it's sheer that you need to swap after is a frontal cone. So you definitely want to be off to the side and then swap afterwards. And then obviously I would implore the rest of the raid group to not steal the orbs that the boss puts out when he shears around the tanks. They need those more than the rest of you. Leave them alone. I've had a few times where our demon hunters have used their little ability and they accidentally end up taking some orbs. I'm like, oh my god, I hate you. Now I have to chi roll all the way across the room to grab some orbs. But yeah, boss phase mainly just make sure you're taunt swapping after essence shear, and you are grabbing your orbs when you're not tanking, keeping your stacks low or at none. It gets a little bit more difficult later in the fight, especially if things start happening less cleanly. But you know, obviously the biggest concern for tanks is keeping your stacks low and making sure you are swapping when necessary in the boss. During the intermission phase, the boss basically becomes undamageable, and 2 big ads will spawn along with a bunch of little ads. When the 2 big ads spawn, each tank needs to take one. Depending on your raid group and your damage, you may want to do a split strat where half the raid group goes to one, half the raid goes to the other. If your DPS collectively is a little bit low, you may want to send everybody to one and send everybody to the other. Keep interrupts on it. Again, a shear will happen, the boss, and a bunch of orbs will drop. You need to, obviously collect those again, and then once those ads are done, you should have a longer period of time where you have time to kill a bunch of little ads going around. So if you're the tank, if your stack's a little bit high, maybe run around, pick up some orbs, and then other than that, just go and help interrupt and kill things. And then after that intermission phase, the boss will go back into his normal phase, and one of the tanks will pick him back up, face him away from their group, and you will continue on from there. And then that just keeps happening. So you keep cycling through those until the boss is dead. Again, this is strictly speaking from a heroic and normal standpoint. I have yet to do the fight on Mythic. I don't. Oreo, are you familiar with any of the new additional Mythic mechanics?
Not Mythic wise. I think Mythic is that his little buddy that is on the front of him comes out and does like a second obliteration beam in a different direction. Um, but I feel that the biggest thing you have to hammer home on this is you have to be careful about the orbs. Like, don't be too close to a melee that could get orbed, because if you get charmed while the other tank is out trying to pick up orbs, that boss is gonna run around. Or if you get two tanks that are charmed at the same time, that's a wipe, because he's gonna turn around and just destroy people.
Yep, no, absolutely. That's a good point to make. I myself have been really dumb and clipped a couple of the orbs when trying to go out and get my little orbs to clear my stacks and gotten mind controlled, and then they have to get me out. I think it's happened one time while tanking, but this was our early stages when we were really trying to learn how to cope with just having copious amounts of melee. So I think we have since forth cleaned that up and figure all that out.
Yep. You're
yeah.
gonna be swearing at your melee for this fight, because they're gonna leave you with no room.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing to note too, tanks during the intermission phase, the boss will randomly target a spot in the room and and do a beam, point it in random directions. If he so happens to point it where you are tanking one of the big ads, you will need to move that ad so that both you and your DPS don't get hit by it. So yeah, you don't want to stand in that stuff. It hurts and it gives you a bunch of stacks. So just be aware of that. And then last but not least, Cahoon. This fight has a lot going on. I will say that much. One of your tanks in the beginning phase is going to be on the ground tanking the big ad. I believe it's the Devourer. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, I think so. No, it's
Dark Young.
Dark Young. Yeah.
Yep. There we go, Dark Young. So yeah, one of your tanks needs to be tanking the Dark Young. Every so often, it will do an ability where it casts a spell in a short radius around it. If any ad or player inside of that gets hit by it, it increases not only the damage they take, but the damage they do. So the usual idea is to drag the Dark Young over the little tentacles, and then, when it does that move, it'll put that debuff on them. And then some of your other, DPS, they may want to take it as well to increase their damage. You don't want to take two of them. You will fall over if you take two of them. It's not a good thing. If you're the tank, your damage and stuff like that doesn't matter. So I'm usually the one doing that. And so I will drag him slowly around the room on all the little tentacles. And when he does that move, I just, I step out of it and go position myself somewhere else where I want him to drag him to. The other tank, depending on what class they are, and we, like I said, we run two monks. So the other tank, he is typically up there doing running one of the orbs on the sides, especially because he can solo one on the lower difficulties. And then that's usually phase one. If you get to a point where the big tentacle spawns, if you were the tank down on lower phase, whether you're one or two tanks down there, a tank needs to have aggro on that, and you need to, along with your melee and other range, need to be interrupting that so that it doesn't cast. It hurts. And then obviously once the last orb gets dunked, you can leave them right where they stand and they'll fall over. So it's not a big deal from there. The really fun part comes in the last two phases. Tanks, you absolutely need to be making sure you are swapping at what is the deep tank debuff called, Oreo? Do you remember?
I don't think it's a debuff. It's just what he gains.
Or his stacks, right?
Yeah, he gets an attack speed increase.
Yeah, and it usually coincides when he will put the balls debuff that as your debuff wears off, you'll shoot a bunch of balls out from you and you'll drop a puddle on the ground. That amount of stacks usually coincides when he puts that maneuver on one of the tanks. So you typically will want to swap tanks right there. The other tank will run his debuff out, drop it along the wall, and then come back. And usually by the time he's back or shortly after, the other tank is it needs to be swapped off of because the boss has reached the number of stacks. And then relatively shortly after that tank who just dropped theirs out will usually get the debuff again, and you'll swap again, and you just kind of cycle through that Depending on your strat, you may dunk your orb during the first blood feast or the second blood feast. Not really sure. And you may also vary in your strats with how many people you want to soak the blood feast when the ad spawns. So the biggest thing to note is usually both your tanks want to be in for that. Whether or not the rest of your raid is, that's up to you. And then one of the tanks needs to hold aggro on the ad that does spawn. Again, I'm strictly speaking from heroic and normal. I have yet to do mythic. But I do know that in heroic normal, in that phase 2, that's really the only thing of concern. There's really nothing else going on other than making sure you're soaking blood feast, you're swapping at the right time and dropping your debuffs along the wall, and then obviously tanking the ad. Once you do make that last dunk, again, the ad will fall over during the beam phase. You'll typically want to lust right there. Going into the last phase, whatever tank has aggro, we utilize a strat where the rest of the group wants to stack on that tank. Once that boss does reach 20% health, because the boss will basically take 90% reduced damage or whatever it is, and he will basically do like an earthquake type ability on the ground, and you will want to move out of that. So we utilize a strat where the tank that has basically aggro, everybody else will stack on him and just follow him around until the boss gets out of that phase. Once that boss comes out of the phase and you go into the third final phase, all of the mechanics from phase 2 still exist. You will have to taunt swap at the right time so the other tank can drop his debuff out, and then when he comes back, you'll swap once the boss gets that same number of stacks again. The other thing you also have going out is you have these little red blobs that will spawn on the ground and eventually explode. They basically form in the shapes of pizza slices. We call them pizza cones. Once they spawn in a certain area, the bigger ones that explode first, you step out of those into the area that has the smaller ones and then they will continue to grow. And then once the big ones explode, you move back over to that side, and all that jazz. So again, as tanks, you need to be making sure that you're pointing the boss. Nobody else should be in front of the boss, and you should be swapping at the right time. And obviously, you want to keep the boss as best as you can in the middle to provide enough room for the rest of the group to move around. And as long as your group does all the mechanics right, the boss should fall over. But I do know that things tend to kind of hit hard on this boss, so even as a monk, I've noticed sometimes where it's like, oh my god, I'm taking a ton of damage, especially with that the ad that you soak the feast from if a bunch of people stand in the feast. So I don't know. Or did you have anything to add here? Marty, did you guys have anything to add here?
I have a few things, but if Marty wants to go first.
No, I'm good.
You're good. I would say there's a few things that you really have to pay attention to on Gahoon for sure. I wouldn't understand how you would do this fight on any difficulty like heroic or mythic without having 2 brewmasters. Honestly, just with the amount of mobility that they have to take their debuffs out and to be able to take all that damage that they do from the ad and the boss at the same time. Not only that, but they can solo a lane for dropping the orb, and that's huge. It really helps cut down the time that you're gonna be, your healers will be healing, your DPS will be doing mechanics that are easily what we've seen when we have stacks of the debuff go off in the middle and we get orbs going everywhere. Like, you just cut down the amount of time and you cut down the amount of time that you could have errors. So things like monks, I mean, I've never seen a prot warrior, but I could imagine that they do a good job of soloing as well because of their ability to do the leaps and the charges and all that stuff. You're gonna really love warlocks in this fight. That's the only thing I can say. Their ability to use their gate is huge, just from a fight perspective.
Yeah.
We've seen in Mythic, you're gonna have 4 warlocks. That's how the Mythic guilds are doing it, because you're gonna be going through you're gonna be beaming twice in that second phase in order to get him to his 20%. I guess you would call it an enrage time, the do or die. So you'll see a lot of brewmaster monks for this, because you're gonna, during that first phase, when the only thing that you are super worried about is just making sure that Dark Young doesn't kill people, you're gonna have one tank running the orb, and to have two brewmasters is super helpful because you can have one run the orb, come down, and the other one can run up and do another lane as well. So, I guess on that fight as well, positioning and being spread out is huge. If you're within, it's 5 yards. I believe if you're within 5 yards of another player, you're gonna get double stacked or triple stacked depending on how many players there are. So if your tank is a little bit out of position and a melee is too close, you instantly get 2 stacks of that debuff up, and that's gonna be maybe not a huge thing at that point in time, but just the damage that starts stacking after a while, especially in the last phase where you can't clear those stacks, it's gonna be huge coming down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I was gonna say for Mythic, at least from what I've seen, because I tuned in for Method going for the world first on Twitch. You have to soak these little sacks that spawn around. It's kind of very similar to the debuff that the Dark Young does. If you get 2 stacks of the debuff, you get mind controlled. It's pretty much game over. So you're gonna have to rotate out. The tanks are gonna have to do it as well. So to have a high mobility tank like a Brewmaster is gonna be a huge plus again.
Yeah, and I will say as a brewmaster, especially in phase 2 and 3, if you can, absolutely take advantage of the fact that you have Zen Med. And especially with your whether you're using chi torpedo or roll, you can retain the ability to have mobility available to you for more cycles of taunt swapping and dropping debuffs if you utilize everything at your disposal. So just keep that in mind. There's absolutely a lot of other things that we could say about each and every of these fights from multiple perspectives, whether talking from melee or ranged, or healing or tanking. But do keep in mind, we're not saying these things because we don't know about them or don't want to. Just keep in mind, this today is strictly trying to speak from a tanking side of things. I know we've briefly touched on a few other things that are maybe not so tanking related. But as we do go through these, we will absolutely touch base on some of these other mechanics or points of interest from these respective roles that we have yet to talk about. So yeah, you can definitely tune in for the following episodes to come when we talk about melee and range and healers and kind of hear us talk about some of that stuff as well. And hopefully each time we do this, we'll have some more progression under our belt from a Mythic side of things, so we'll be able to talk more firsthand with each respective episode. So, but I think that's really all I have to say on Uldir as a tank for now, unless you guys have any last minute things you want to throw in there.
No, I mean, I wish that it was a bit more balanced for tanks. Is the only thing. Then you start seeing variety, and then you start seeing variety of strats as well to be used. But I feel like if you don't have your Brewmaster, at least one Brewmaster, you're not going to be going very far in Mythic at least.
Or you're going to have a much harder time to do so. I mean, I know we've already seen a few guilds like Future and I think Blood Legion as well. They've had some prop Halley. They've had a Vengeance Demon Hunter that have cleared through, but obviously they weren't. Method I think used 2 remasters for almost every fight other than Fetid, right?
Yeah, I think it was Fetid.
They sat one of their. I think Sko sat on his brewmaster for bringing a Blood DK in, but. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's really going to do it for us, guys. We're right at the hour mark, and because we did start a little later, I know Marty has to go, so we're going to let him get out of here and get some sleep. He's 7 hours ahead, so it's almost 11:30 for him right now. So that's going to wrap it up for us, guys. You can tune in next weekend, 2:30 Central Standard Time on Sunday. We shouldn't be late next week. In the event that something does come up, I will let you guys know on Twitter. And we will be talking about one of the DPS classes, DPS roles rather. So we have yet to decide whether it be melee or ranged, but I will make that announcement later in the week. Thank you for all those that came by for the live show today. And if those of you that maybe weren't able to but do want to, again, it's every Sunday at 2:30 Central Standard Time live on Twitch. That's gonna do it for us, guys. We will talk to you next episode. See ya.
Bye.
You guys want to find Marty, you can find him over at the Blizzard podcast he does, where they talk all things Blizzard games. The Blue Recluse. If you want to find him on Twitter, you can find him at Unamathil. For me, guys, if you want to find me and personally, you can find me over on my Twitch and Twitter, which are both at Mega Irish Gaming, or you can find me on my All Things Blizzard podcast, which I do with my good friend Dusty Porter, the Blizzard Umbrella, If you want to find us here on the show, you can find us at our Twitter account, which is at _TRC podcast, or you can find us on our email, theraidersconfessional@gmail.com, no apostrophe on the S. That being said, guys, Dusty, take us out of here, my man. See ya.
Sorry, I died. Was I supposed to stand in the green puddles or the orange ones?
Hey, get together over there, bud.
This show has been hosted by Dragon Powered Studios, and the intro and outro has been brought to you by Thankful Cow Solutions.
Moo.